Hello there, I am here to talk to you about more books about people who are obsessed with other people, just the most absolute, complete, utter weirdo freaks you've ever heard about. The stack is Perfume by Patrick Süskind, Perfect Days by Raphael Montes, Loner by Teddy Wayne, and Social Creature by Isabella Burton. I have already read Loner by Teddy Wayne, and I'm going to talk to you about it right now. So in short, Loner follows a loner, David. It's his freshman year at Harvard, and he is convinced of his own likability, though he has spent his life as a loner. He thinks that he's going to go to Harvard and everyone is going to recognize his unbridled intelligence and they're going to love him and he doesn't have to put any effort in. And then he becomes obsessed with a woman who lives in his dorm, Veronica, and it just fucking escalates from there. This book is a car crash. This book is impossible to look away from, and it's horrible to look at. So skip this section if you don't want spoilers. I'm going to talk about everything that happens in the plot. It opens with his orientation into Harvard. As he's entering the building, he meets this girl who seems really friendly, and her name's Sarah. She is not the woman that David is obsessed with. The woman David is obsessed with is Veronica, who he refers to as you. And it's this like jarring perspective shift when all of a sudden he says, you walk into the room and you're like, oh my God, he's a creep. I love second person, and I think it was employed really well here. I kind of think the show You ruined it in some ways, especially in a book like this. This is in some ways really similar to You. I feel like the characters are pretty much the same. But I feel like this does its own thing. So David sees Veronica, and she's kind of this aloof, unapproachable, popular girl. He projects a lot onto her. She is both this popular girl, this woman who doesn't need anyone else's attention or validation, and she's what he sees himself as, which is like a loner who nobody else understands. Now, David has entered this orientation space assured of his own capacity to be intelligent and likable, even though he's a fucking freak and he's completely socially inept. And these two jocks that he tries to make conversation with kind of totally blow him off and treat him as the weirdo that he is. They're definitely rude to him, but he is also being really weird and really awkward. This book is fucking achingly awkward. He has this thing where he can flip words around in his brain and say them backwards, and he just so awkwardly interrupts these two jocks' conversation. The two of them obviously know each other. He just interrupts them and starts saying the words they're saying backwards. When Veronica enters the room, she blows off these two jocks who call out to her. And this is big for David because he feels frustrated by the lack of attention that these jocks have given to him. Now, David ends up falling into this group of friends with his roommate, Steven, and this girl, Sarah, who he met right at the beginning. Steven and Sarah are making this monumental effort to include David, and he makes no effort whatsoever and calls them his placeholders. He doesn't want to be stuck with this group of friends because he can tell they're just losers, and he wants to be cool and popular and well liked. So Sarah is being so nice to him, and he's just blowing her off over and over again because all he has eyes for is Veronica, this woman who he has had truly no interactions with whatsoever. Then he finds Veronica's full name in the student directory, and he figures out we live in the same dorm, and he also figures out where her hometown is and looks her up online, and he starts walking through the dorm looking for her dorm room, and when he finds it, he finds her name on it, and her roommate is Sarah. So now he's like, okay, well, I guess Sarah's worth talking to because she lives with Veronica. So he starts inviting Sarah to stuff, and he very obviously is trying to get back into her room. He finds all of the people he sees Veronica out with in the student directory and very casually drops information about them throughout the book as if it's very normal that he has extensively researched every one of these people. I guess at Harvard you do this shopping for classes thing where before classes start you go and test a bunch of them out, and he follows Veronica to the classes that she goes to. He first follows her to this big lecture on American literature, and then the second class that they go to is this very, very small seminar, and he wiggles his way in here, and the professor says, just remind everyone you should only be here if you've already signed up for this class, and there's only 12 students allowed. And he looks around and he counts 13. In this absolutely tiny little class, David tries so smugly to be cool. And so he says this horrible joke that nobody gets, and then he's like, oh, I'm just too smart for them. So then he explains his joke, which is just a pun on fallacy and phallic, and it's silence in the room. It is so deeply, incredibly awkward. Genuinely, this scene is one of the most difficult to read things that I have ever read in my life. Just the idea of being in a class that you're not supposed to be in. Everybody else has information that you don't. It's does everyone know that I'm the outcast in here? But then he doesn't even care that he's the outcast in there. He just wants to get closer to Veronica. Oh, it's so horrible. Oh my god, it's so horrible. He ends up thinking things through with Sarah a lot and deciding to start a relationship with her because he knows that she'll be into it. He doesn't want to start a relationship with Sarah and then have Veronica not want to be with him, but he does want to get closer to her, and he hasn't been able to yet. He finally, after so much, like, the most awkward, like, oh my god, maybe we should just study in your room. Oh, we can't do my room because my roommate's always here. Why don't we just, maybe I could just meet you up in your room. He finally gets into their room, and Veronica is never there. And Sarah's like, yeah, we're not really friends. Like, she's always out partying, doing whatever she wants. She's hardly ever here. We've spoken maybe 5 words to each other. So David doesn't end up getting off the wait list for this tiny little gender studies seminar, but he is in this literature class with her. And after so much fucking tense, awkward stalking, where he's just like following her around whenever he sees her, making excuses to leave a place when he sees her leaving, he'll wait outside the door for her to arrive to class and then pretend he's just texting on his phone and then follow her inside so he can sit beside her. After all this, the professor mentions an essay that David has written in class. And after the class, Veronica says, nice job. And he says, oh yeah, what are you writing your next essay on? And she says, oh, I haven't even started it. And he manages to convince her to let him help her write her essay. They meet up in the library, and she truly just makes him write it. She's absolutely just using him. She's giving him monosyllabic answers. She has no interest expressed in him whatsoever. She just wants him to write the essay for her. And it's this like horrible, funny thing where she's like, oh, could you just help me come up with an idea? And then she writes this terrible introduction, and she reads it to him, and he's like, wow, she's not as smart as I thought she was. He's like, okay, well, maybe I'll just write the introduction for you. And she just keeps pushing it until he's just sitting there typing away on her computer, and she's texting and not giving him any attention at all. At one point, she goes to the bathroom, and he's alone on her computer, and he tries to snoop. She's not logged into her email, but he's able to look at the other Word documents that she's opened recently. It's mostly just school stuff, but one of them is this weird log, which is important. It's this log of expenses with a dash and then an initial after the expenses. But it's weird. It's like there's one that's like $200 on dinner, and then there's one that's $4 on tampons. It doesn't really make sense, but he can't make sense of it. There's very little information in this log. Once he's finished writing the entirety of her essay with no help and trying desperately to make conversation with her, even though she has no interest in talking to him, it's just these little tiny responses. She doesn't care about what he has to say. It's often she's just going in response to him. They leave, and when they leave, she says, bye, David, like his name backwards, because he had mentioned something about this thing where he can reverse words. And he's like, oh my god, it's a sign. She likes me back. And that sets up the dynamic that lasts between them for the rest of the book, which is mostly him desperately vying for her attention and just having these awkward and deeply uninterested conversations with her. But then sometimes she'll show just a tiny little bit of kindness or just neutrality, and he'll be like, oh my god, it's a sign. All this time, he's dating Sarah, who is like a really nice and a really intelligent young woman. She's very likable. She's very like socially aware, where he is definitely not. She's not afraid to correct him, and she likes him. And he is just using her, and he wants to spend as much time in her room as he can, even though Veronica is never there. One time he's in there and he pushes his luck, and he goes into Veronica's room. It's like, I don't know, something with Harvard. They have their own rooms, but it's like a shared common space or something. I don't know. There's a door that shuts him off from Veronica, but he goes into her room when neither of the women are there, and he steals the belt off of her robe, this monogrammed belt, and he snips off the monogrammed bit, and he carries it around in his pocket for the rest of the book. David is always just like catching up to Veronica and forcing her into conversations while she walks places, and he just like kind of trails along beside her. And one of these times, one of her friends comes up to them, and her friend invites David to this like big Harvard party that he wouldn't typically be invited to. At this party, he embarrasses himself in front of all of her friends with this really smug attitude. He always thinks he is saying the most clever and intelligent and funny thing, and then he's met with just absolute silence because he's not funny and he's not clever and he's not intelligent. But he believes in himself so wholeheartedly, and it's that earnest belief that he is someone with something to give others. He's someone with likable qualities that makes it so hard to read his interactions and also so hard to look away from them. At this party, he's also openly following her wherever she goes, and he meets her boyfriend, Liam, who she is fighting with. She ends up leaving the party early. He follows her out. She kind of cries in his arms for a second because she's fighting with her boyfriend. not really. He obviously is like reading into it so much more than anyone else ever would. The next day, he's in Sarah's room and there's a blackout across Cambridge. And Veronica comes out of her room one of these few nights where she's actually home, and she is finally like kind and engages with them. And she says, let's drink. There's a blackout. But while they drink, she starts pestering David about what he was doing the night before, knowing that he was at this party with her, but also knowing that he was supposed to go to the Philharmonic Opera or something, some concert or something like that. She knows he was supposed to go with Sarah. He had canceled on Sarah, saying, I really have to study, I have to write this essay, I'm so sorry. And she's trying to get him to like mess up and let something slip so Sarah knows that he has lied to her. But he doesn't slip up, and when Veronica ends up leaving, Sarah talks about how weird that was and how she's fighting with her boyfriend, and she must be trying to make Sarah hate her boyfriend because they have such a better relationship than Veronica and Liam do. In the following days, he doesn't see much of Veronica, and he's spending a lot of time with Sarah, and he ends up assaulting Sarah twice. The first time being so that he's no longer a virgin, and the second time being so that Veronica can hear them through the wall. It's this pretty realistic thing where Sarah doesn't explicitly say yes or no, but she does tell him, I don't want to, and he just persists until she ends up relenting, so he can convince himself that this was a consensual relationship when it obviously was not. He sees Veronica in the hallway one time, and she makes a comment about how lucky Sarah is being attracted to nice guys like David, where Veronica is attracted to assholes. And you're like, fuck, David's gonna be even more of an asshole now. And he is. He breaks up with Sarah loud enough for Veronica to hear. And in breaking up with Sarah, he's ousted from the friend group that him and Sarah have been part of since the beginning of the semester. This friend group of placeholders that he was just hanging out with so he didn't have to be alone. They see that Sarah has been dumped, and they take her side, and she also tells them about the assaults. David, who is still relentlessly engaging with Veronica, even though all she is expressing is not even like not interested, it's like actual active disinterest. Like she doesn't want him to be around her, and he's relentless. He says, I'll help you write your next essay, because he's thinking she's such a bad writer. I saw what she was writing and it was so fucking terrible. So they go to the library, and the whole time she's like amping up this faking being sick. Like she coughs a few times and then she coughs more and more, and she's like, you know what, I better turn in for the night. And he's like, okay, here's your laptop. She's like, what? Well, have you sent the essay to yourself? He's like, it's your essay, why would I send it to myself? She says, well, it needs to be finished. And he's like, oh yeah, okay, I'll finish the essay. But instead of finishing the essay, he tails her out of the library, and he follows her to this house, and he sees the last name at the buzzer of the house, and he thinks, that's her TA, and he realizes that she's having an affair with her married TA, which is of course not allowed. He's like a graduate student. There's a huge power imbalance here. And so he threatens to complain about this TA to the board, and she says, no, don't worry about it, I'll do it. Thanks for looking out for me, David. The next time the two of them see each other is at a party where he follows her around the entire time, and she is obviously and openly irritated with him. And then at the end of the night, she leaves early, he follows her back to the dorms. She doesn't even say goodnight to him, and he emails her and he says, that was really rude of you not to say goodnight to me, especially after I've done so many favors for you. P.S. I'm telling the board that you are having this relationship with the TA because he needs to be fired. He needs to be reprimanded for this. She shows up to the door at his dorm room and she says, David, I really don't want you to get involved with this. I'll send the complaint. Like, leave it up to me because there's really no proof. It's just my word. And if you complain, nothing's going to happen. He ends up coming on to her in the dorm room. He tries to kiss her and she backs up. And she backs all the way up against the wall. And he is pushing her up against the wall. And she ends up rubbing a picture frame on his crotch until he finishes. And then she runs out of the room. And he's like, oh my God, it's actually happening. We are actually going to be together. But then it's Thanksgiving break and they don't see each other. And he texts her a few times. She doesn't respond. So he takes the train into New York to her place of residence where her parents live. He waits outside of her apartment for hours and hours and hours. And then finally she exits, but she gets into a cab too quickly. So he gets into a cab and he follows her to a bar, and he goes into the bar. He manages to weasel his way in, even like he's so good at lying, just like off the cuff. The bouncer says, I need your ID. He says, my ID's inside. I was here last night. My friend had to get his stomach pumped. We had to leave right away. I left it in there. I need to go get it. I'm getting on a plane tomorrow. Like, you have to let me in. The bouncer's like, whatever, dude, just go in. David goes in and he pretends, this is so random. I can't believe that we're both just here. She's like, oh, actually, me and my friends were just leaving. He says, stay for one more drink. It's on me, I promise. He goes to get their drinks and he comes back and they're all gone. And he waits there for hours. And he texts her and of course she doesn't respond. So he ends up drinking all of their drinks. He gets really sick. He leaves his debit card at the bar. He gets to the train. He misses the last train to New Jersey by like 3 minutes. He's got to spend the night in the train station. Back at school, it's finals and he doesn't really see her at all. She is not showing up to their literature class. He does wait outside of her feminism class and he hears her in there. He hears her voice talking. The door's cracked open and she is like so articulate, so intelligent, so much more than he had seen in this essay introduction that she had written and showed him. And he's like, wow, I guess she's just blowing off the literature class. Like most people can't really put all of the effort into all of the classes, but she's so intelligent. She's just like me. I'm so intelligent. I'm the smartest guy ever. And she is the smartest woman ever. And we're going to be the perfect couple. He ends up looking up where her finals are in the classes that he knows that she's taking so that he can just randomly be outside and stumble into her. That doesn't work because in her feminism class, which is I think the only one that he knows the actual class, it's a final essay and it says you got to drop the final essay off in the professor's mailbox by 5 that day. So he goes to the professor's mailbox to just be randomly waiting outside. Oh my god, what a coincidence that you're here. But he shuffles through the mail and he sees that her essay is like right on top and he opens up this fucking essay. Oh my god. And the essay is called A Market-Based Study of Female Sexual Transactions. This starts by talking about her relationship with Liam, who is the alpha. And it's just like about the transactional nature of relationships. This log that he had found was logging things that Liam had bought. And then the initials were different types of intercourse that they had had after this. He keeps reading, and part B is the beta male. And this essentially is just reflecting a mirror back to him of his own fucked up behaviors that he has been trying to masquerade as something else. She hadn't fallen for any of it. She saw right through this guy, and she writes about it in this essay. She uses him as a comparison subject for Liam, who was receiving various commodities from her, just as she was from him. But she was curious about what would happen if it was just transactional, he was just giving to her. Would he still want to maintain a relationship with her? She says, to what lengths would Beta, who's David, extend himself for the presumptive possibility of sex? She writes, with no suggestions on my end of sexual reward, he voluntarily wrote 2 essays for me in clear violation of the honor code. And there's a little asterisk here, and there's a footnote that says, I wrote my own papers before our meetings and did not, of course, submit either of his, which suffered from retrograde ideas and stilted prose, as if he thought he could browbeat me into admiring submission with overwrought sentence constructions and baroque vocabulary. So this, of course, destroys David, whose entire life has been revolving around the possibility of sex with this woman, and he ends up breaking into her dorm room. She's moving out. He also has blown off all of his exams. Like, he's fucking lost it. He breaks into her dorm room and he hides in her closet. He knows that she'll be there that night. And in her closet, he takes off his pants, and you're like, And then that is kind of how the book ends. He tries to assault her while she's sleeping. Doesn't get all the way before being stopped, but definitely assaults her to some degree. She runs out of the room and he stays lying in her bed waiting for the cops, and he imagines how his face is going to be plastered across the news and everybody's going to be talking about the creep at Harvard and he's going to go to jail for the rest of his life and all of these different things. And of course, none of that happens. Basically, he gets away scot-free. It's his word against hers. It is a very realistic portrayal of how this would go, like, legally, but it also sucks so bad to read. His life is ruined. He's kicked out of Harvard and he basically lives in his parents' basement for the next 4 years and he doesn't do anything with his life. But he's also not really punished, and it was really icky. It was just like a really shitty fucking ending. But I can't say it was like a poorly written ending or an ending that didn't fit. I think it was kind of exactly what would happen, what you think would happen in a scenario where this creepy dude who thinks he's owed the world by women is obsessed and stalks a woman. How is it going to end? It's probably going to end like that. Did I feel sick to my stomach after reading this? Yes. Did I want to crawl out of my skin? Yes, I did. I think it's really hard to rate or recommend this book because of how deeply uncomfortable it made me feel, particularly at the end. That was its intention, though, but like, I sat there, I was like this. I hated it. So in terms of my thoughts on this book, I think it was a great book, but I can't say I enjoyed it because, like, oh my god, it was so fucking awkward. It was so uncomfortable. It was so hard to read, and it was so hard not to read. Very compelling, very fast paced, sick to my stomach the whole time. I have never hated a character quite in the way that I hated David. I think his characterization was great. I loved hating him, and I also really liked how well his personality matched with the voice. At first it was hard to get into, and I thought it was like the authorial voice, and I was like, oh my god, this fucking author is like a prick. Like, what a pompous douchebag. On the first page, a timpani concerto pounded in my chest as we made landfall upon the hallowed ground that had been locked in my sights for years. We'd arrived. That is insufferable, but it fits with who he is. This kind of like faux intellectual character. It really makes sense the way this book is written. It's just kind of hard to get into at the beginning when you don't really realize exactly who David is as a person. But then as you go through the book, you just think, oh my god, this voice matches perfectly. I actually think it was like really skilled. He's insufferable in this very specific way where he thinks he's so much smarter than he is, and he thinks he's better than everyone else, and then he actually talks to people, and it's fucking awful. It's horrible to read. He does this thing very often that you only see because you're reading the book, where he repeats things in new contexts. Like, he'll hear someone make a really cogent argument and he'll just repeat it to sound smart, and often it doesn't quite work, and he's met with this awkward silence that is prevalent, pervasive in this book. It's a book full of fucking awkward silence. But then he also does that in the writing. This literature class that him and Veronica are taking together, it's about mainly the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock, which is a poem that I studied last semester in depth. And so I noticed every single time he would reference the poem in his writing, it was kind of just like seamlessly put in because he writes in this very like pompous way that is sort of similar to Eliot's poems. It fits in, but you're like, oh, like he uses the simile or metaphor, fucking whatever, of a patient etherized upon a table, and you're like, that's from Prufrock. And I think that it was blended in really well, and it matches the way he is in actual conversation. It was vividly frustrating in a way that I don't think I've ever experienced before. I really felt emotions while reading this book. They were all horrible. They were all incredibly uncomfortable. Like I said, so awkward, it was making my stomach hurt. I could hardly put up with this, and I needed to know what happened because the plot just moves so quickly, and you're like, what is this fucking freak gonna do next? I thought that this was clever with its characters and with its plot and with its use of voice. I think this is a great campus novel. It has a really strong sense of setting that really works with the story that it's telling. I find it hard to rate or recommend this book because I think that it did what it was doing well, but it made me feel so viscerally terrible that I wanted to curl up into a ball and die. In terms of books about obsession, this is a great book about obsession. It's believable, but also fucking preposterous. The use of second person, I think, is perfect for this. I also think, like, being inside his head, it makes sense the way he's obsessed with her and the way he justifies it to himself and what he does to, like, make himself seem normal. And, like, he never really reflects or looks inward. I think that it makes a lot of sense. Like, as the reader, you're like, this guy's fucking bananas, but I get how he's come to the conclusions he's come to. So, like, it was great, but in terms of my own comfort, I never want to look at this or think about it again. Like, actually get it out of my fucking sight. The next book I'm reading is Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton, and I will update you when I'm done with it. Every time I sit down to film, it begins with at least 2 minutes of me fucking with this mic stand. Should that be... Hello there, I'm here to talk to you about Social Creature by Tara Isabella Burton. In short, this is about a toxic, intense, whirlwind, obsessive friendship between two women that ends in tragedy and secrets and cover-ups. And now I'm going to start talking about spoilers, so if you want to read this, which I would recommend it, I had a lot of fun with this book, don't listen to the next part. So this book begins by introducing us to our main character, Louise, who is this isolated, lonely, self-loathing, kind of lost woman living in New York City. And she meets the wonderful, exuberant, outgoing, excessive Lavinia. Lavinia is this very specific, very singular character. She's theatrical and she's over the top and she's living this like incredibly cultivated life. She's a very wealthy 23-year-old woman who's just like living in New York and going to parties and dressing up in vintage 20s like flapper gowns and speaking in a transatlantic accent. And they meet because Louise is tutoring Lavinia's younger sister Cordelia, who's staying with Lavinia for a couple of weeks. Lavinia takes Louise to this crazy New Year's Eve party. And at this party, they're just like drinking, they're doing coke, they're going fucking crazy, and they meet this woman, Mimi, who obviously knows Lavinia and who is kind of like desperate for Lavinia's attention, and Lavinia is kind of disgusted by Mimi. When Louise first sees this woman, Mimi, she's speaking in such a weird, like kind of clipped way. And she realizes after a while that Mimi is trying to sound like Lavinia. And I think as the reader, it's pretty clear here that Lavinia is like cycling through these really intense friendships with women, and that Louise is going to end up as the next Mimi. Right here, like 30 pages into the book tells us that Lavinia dies 6 months after this. That Lavinia dies and that Louise is there. And it keeps reminding us of this. And part of me was like, I wish I didn't know that. I know that there's a reason that she tells us and that she sets it up, but I would prefer not to know what happens in the book. I think it would have hit harder if I didn't know. But it was still exciting when she dies nonetheless. After this party, they go their separate ways, and Lavinia doesn't contact Louise for a week. And Louise is like, fuck, that was my one taste at this like beautiful life that Lavinia leads. And then a week later, she contacts her. She says, we're going to another party, darling. Come with me. And they go to this party, and Louise is at this party. She's feeling like really inadequate. They're less absolutely trash, and she feels like Lavinia is kind of testing her to see how she gets on with her friends. At this party, Louise meets these two men, Rex and Hal. They're best friends, and Rex is Lavinia's ex. He's the only guy she's ever dated, and she really likes the idea of being a woman who only ever loved once. And so she refuses to ever see anybody else, and she doesn't want to go back to Rex. Like, they ended on bad terms, but there's a lot of history and tension and nastiness between the two of them. Lavinia and Louise start spending all of their time together. Lavinia doesn't work, she has wealthy parents, but Louise is juggling like multiple jobs, and she's staying up all night partying with Lavinia and then going to work the next morning. One night, she's walking home after a party, and she lives obviously in a much rougher part of New York than Lavinia does. And there's this guy who's always on her street, catcalling her. And he almost attacks her. Like, he gets a lot closer than he ever has before, and she ends up punching the shit out of him. And when she tells Lavinia about this, Lavinia's like, oh, darling, just come move in with me. Cordelia's not staying in her room right now. You can just live in her room. And when they go to move all of Louise's stuff out of her place, Lavinia sees the man that was going to attack Louise, and she confronts him. And this confrontation really shows how privileged and how out of touch this woman is, because she's this like small white woman confronting this black man and telling him he should be drawn and quartered, he should be hanged. And she's not understanding at all the history and the weight behind what she's saying. She just lives in a completely different world than everybody else. And it's so clear as you're getting to know Lavinia's character that no one has ever said no to this woman, that she always gets exactly what she wants. And like, she can punish people really easily. She holds her social capital and her financial capital over all of the people in her life. Like, if Louise pushes back against Lavinia at all, even the tiniest bit, all of a sudden, Lavinia is on her phone when the bill comes, and she leaves Louise, who is struggling with money, to pay for it. Or she gets out of the taxi before she can pay for the taxi, and Louise has to front the bill. I want to really like convey how unique of a character Lavinia is. I think that her compelling nature is what kept me so interested in this story. She's such a passionate and charming person, and she says things like splendid or we shall have tea. She has such a specifically cultivated life and persona, and she seems so incredibly fake, but she's so fascinating. And Louise is just way less interesting than Lavinia, but she's trying to emulate her, and that makes her fascinating as well. The two of them go to the opera. It's this big thing. Lavinia has bought them tickets, and she's very excited for this entire opera experience. They get dressed up in her furs and her silk gowns and whatever the fuck clothes that Lavinia has. She has rooms and rooms full of dresses. And at this opera, they're sitting together and the music is playing, and all of a sudden Lavinia is kissing Louise on the neck. That's not that weird for them. They're very intimate, very close with each other. They've seen each other naked many times. They're just intimately familiar with each other's bodies, and physical closeness is normal for them. But then she starts fingering Louise, and Louise is sitting there has she been gay this whole time? Am I gay? Is this gay together? Are we gay? I don't know if I didn't think we were gay. And then she looks up, and across the room, she can see Rex watching them, and she realizes that Lavinia is trying to make Rex jealous. So she gets up and she leaves. And Rex comes and finds her, and they miss the entire second half of the opera. And Hal, Rex's best friend, this absolute shithead guy, sees them together and tells Lavinia that they're together. And Louise knows Lavinia is going to be very upset with her. And Lavinia has all the power in this relationship and now in Louise's life generally. Louise is living in her apartment, but it's secret. Her parents own the apartment, but Louise is not supposed to be there and can easily be kicked out. She has to kind of sneak in and out. The neighbors can't see her. She doesn't have her own key. She has to be let in by Lavinia every time. And though Lavinia is paying for almost everything, she still is broke as fuck. She's missing a lot of shifts as a tutor. She loses one of her jobs and then just keeps losing her jobs later on. But she just does not have money because she's living this really exaggerated lifestyle with Lavinia. So she needs Lavinia to survive financially, physically, and then also emotionally and socially. She completely relies on this woman, and she can't find her at the opera. She can't find her anywhere, and she knows that she is going to be in big trouble. And then she finally finds her. She's pissed. She's drunk out of her fucking mind, puking everywhere in the fountain in the park. And she says, oh my God, darling, we need to pay the busker. Will you get some cash out with my card? Louise takes her card to the ATM and sees that she has $100,000 in her bank account. And so, of course, Louise starts stealing money from Lavinia. Just 100 here and there. She takes her card and she takes money from her because she can't survive. And she's, like I said, losing her jobs until she absolutely has no job. She's out of work. She's completely living just off of Lavinia's money. And also, secretly, she's seeing Rex, which is obviously this huge thing that would absolutely blow everything up, but they're kind of in love with each other. Louise is also trying to hide that she's lost her job because obviously Lavinia is going to be where are you getting your money from? And so she'll leave the house pretending that she's tutoring, but actually she's just going to see Rex. One of these times she leaves the house, she sees Lavinia out with Mimi, and Lavinia starts seeing Mimi more. Mimi, Lavinia doesn't like her. She's very desperate for Lavinia's attention, and it's kind of just this thing where Lavinia is trying to make Louise jealous, and it's working, and their relationship is becoming more and more fractured until this confrontation at a party that they're both at. At this party, Louise has got this job bartending where Lavinia's just there as a guest of the party, and Lavinia keeps being let's do something crazy, because that's her vibe. She's let's break into the green room, or let's do this, let's do that. And Louise is no, Lavinia, just wait till I'm off shift, then I'll do something with you. But she's saying no, but she is saying no, and Lavinia cannot handle someone saying no to her. So it all comes to a head in the bathroom of this party. Lavinia confronts Louise and she says, do you think I'm stupid? I know that you're stealing money from me. And Louise scrambles to find a reason for this, to find something, because her life falls apart if she loses Lavinia. She's lost everything. She was living in a rent-controlled apartment. She'll have to move home with her parents, who I don't think she has a good relationship with. So she goes and says, Lavinia, I'm in love with you. And that manages to throw everything off balance. And Lavinia kind of forgives her for a moment. She says, okay, let's take a photo. I'm going to take a photo of you. That's something I forgot to mention, is these women are very much on social media, and everything in their life is very cultivated to be beautiful for social media. And it's this interesting thing where It's set in like 2015, and so they're like posting on Facebook, and they're posting like I can just imagine the filters that they're using when they're doing this, and the kind of things they're posting. It's like, just, I don't know, it was so interesting to me. I was 15 in 2015. They're like 23. Well, Lavinia's 23. Louise is 29, and she's pretending to be 26. It's this weird thing where like social media is really important in the lives of these two women, but it's not this like hugely central thing in this book. It's often just like, will you take a photo of me? And then talking about how what they've posted and what the caption was on their photos, but it's not like super in depth. This isn't really like a social media novel, even though it is called Social Creatures. Don't let that trick you. It's not like over the top with the social media, but you know that in their lives, it is like over the top how obsessed they are with appearances on social media. And in this moment, when they go to take a photo, Rex texts Louise and says, I miss you, I want to see you again. And Lavinia, of course, sees this, and she starts blowing the fuck up, and she's screaming at Louise, and then she takes her phone, and her own phone, and she starts writing out a Facebook post calling Louise out. This is like kind of, I think, before, I don't want to say cancel culture because I hate that, but before like call out posts were really big, this is more like a personal thing, not like she's calling her out to the public, like trying to get her canceled, trying to get her fired, or like have a really lasting impact on her public life. It's more like all of the people that they know will see this post. And in this post, Lavinia is detailing how Louise has stolen money from her, how she's seeing her ex-boyfriend behind her back, and how Lavinia has done so much for Louise, and in return, Louise has just betrayed her again and again. And Louise can't get her to stop writing this post. And so to get her to stop, she grabs Lavinia by the hair and she smashes her head into the sink again and again and again. And Lavinia dies. And Louise is now stuck, locked in this bathroom with a woman that she has killed, and people on the outside knocking, banging on the door, trying to get in, trying to use the bathroom. So she ends up cleaning up Lavinia and taking her out of the room as if she's really sick. She takes her back to their apartment. She gets all the way there. Like, they go into a taxi. They're like crowd surfed across the crowd. It's this crazy, like, explosive scene, but she gets this body back to the apartment and she puts her in the bathtub. And this is halfway through the book. So that begins the lies and the secrets. This night, she has to create an alibi for herself and also for Lavinia. So she dresses up as Lavinia, and she goes and she meets Mimi back at the party. She knows Mimi is a sloppy drunk and is like shit-faced, and Mimi thinks that she is Lavinia. They take some photos together where Louise's face is kind of covered. They post them online. Lavinia seems to be alive because Louise is pretending to be her. Then she goes out and she sees Rex and she says, I got in a huge fight with Lavinia. She won't let me into the apartment. Can I stay with you tonight? So she stays overnight at Rex's house. They have sex, I think, for the first time. And it's kind of like a magical experience where she forgets everything that's happening. And then the next morning, she's like, oh my God, fuck. There's a dead body in the bathtub at my apartment. I have to decide how Lavinia dies. It's this very intense, very frightening thing of trying to cover up a crime but not being clear-headed enough to think it through. She ends up putting Lavinia into a trunk and dumping her body in a river. And it really goes through the details of how she does this, how she dresses up and acts as Lavinia when she rents a car to move the trunk, and how she makes sure she's seen on specific cameras, and how she goes to like a sketchy bodega to take money out of Lavinia's card at the ATM, and she still like is wearing sunglasses and makes sure that she's dressed in Lavinia's clothes when she does this. Louise doesn't like become Lavinia, but she does post as her on social media. She makes all of these different reasons as to why no one has seen Lavinia. She's decided to be sober. She's going up for a trip to clear her mind, like a Walden-esque trip in the forest, or she's going on a yoga retreat, or she's doing this or she's doing that, and she just keeps posting as her. She can very easily do Lavinia's voice as well, because Lavinia had such a cultivated accent that was not like a real way that she would like naturally speak, so it's pretty easy to mimic. So Louise can even call people and pretend to be Lavinia very well. In their circle of friends, she still is Louise, but she has taken Lavinia's spot. And she kind of excuses their relationship falling apart because she's openly dating Rex now, and everyone knows that that's not something that Lavinia would want, but they're all kind of okay with Louise and Rex being together, particularly because Lavinia is not there to cause problems because she's fucking dead. And for months, this works out. Louise manages to make everyone think that Lavinia is still alive, even though no one sees her, and she manages to live off of Lavinia's funds and date Rex and be part of this social circle, obviously with this crazy cloud hanging over her head, weight on her chest, anxiety about what is going to happen. Is someone going to find Lavinia's body? When is this all going to come crashing down? And it's definitely this thing of like an inevitability of her life really falling apart. And then one day, months after Lavinia has died, Cordelia shows up at the apartment. She's the only other person with a key. And Cordelia sets off this very, very tricky web of lies that Louise has to just come up with on the spot. She says, "Oh, you've just missed her. She's gone on a trip, just like literally just left with her friends." And Louise has also made new Facebook profiles for other people who are Lavinia's new, sober, yoga, hippie friends. Cordelia is like, "That's okay. I'll wait here for her. I don't want to go back home for Christmas anyway, and I would rather see my sister. I really miss her." And so the two of them start living together, and Louise just has to keep lying and lying and lying to Cordelia, who is the only person who's really like picking on her and really suspicious and like trying to pry everything apart with what's happening with her sister, because Cordelia thinks that Lavinia is just off her medication and that she's kind of just like going through a crisis. During this time, Louise and Rex have to start seeing each other in secret because Cordelia knows that Lavinia would never allow them to be together, and that's kind of what they've told all of their friends. And Louise even left a message on Rex's phone as Lavinia saying, "I give you my blessing. I just don't want to see it happen." But Louise knows that Cordelia would never believe that Lavinia was okay with this. And so they're seeing each other less because Louise is honestly spending a lot of time with Cordelia. They kind of start to like each other. Cordelia is kind of like an immature, younger version of Lavinia. And because Rex and Louise are seeing each other less, there's this kind of chasm that starts to grow between the two of them. And one day, Rex finally texts and he says, "I miss you. I've been thinking about you. I really want to see you." And Louise goes to text him back and she realized that he has texted Lavinia's phone. And then Rex continues to text Lavinia's phone kind of desperately. Louise as Lavinia is not answering him. And he's still saying like, "I love you. I want to get back together, blah, 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 blah," whatever. Cordelia ends up leaving. She says, I'm just gonna go home for Christmas." I think Lavinia calls her, Louise as Lavinia, calls her and says a whole bunch of like really selfish things where she's like, "Oh, darling, I don't care that you want to talk to me. I'm doing my own thing right now." And it just really upsets Cordelia. And so Cordelia is like, "I'm just not going to wait for her." So she goes home. Louise and Rex go to a party and there's a whole bunch of snow, and they get back and they're naked on the fucking couch in the apartment. And who shows up but Cordelia? She catches them. Cordelia immediately starts throwing accusations around, saying that something has happened to her sister and that Louise is like basically a killer. She comes to this conclusion really quickly and easily. I might have missed something, but that was my main issue with this book, is like, that's a really crazy conclusion for Cordelia to have jumped to so instantly. Louise and Rex end up leaving to let Cordelia kind of calm down. She's like absolutely in hysterics. And they go to the ocean. And when they're at the ocean, Louise is like really hot. And so she gets into the water and she starts like splashing cold water on her. She knows that everything has fallen apart at this point. And she ends up admitting to Rex that she has killed Lavinia. And Rex is like, "What do we do? What the fuck do we do?" He first doesn't believe her, of course, but then she walks him all the way through it. And he's like, "Holy shit, like, what the fuck do we do? We have to call the police, whatever." Louise ends up drowning Rex in the ocean. She holds him under the water and she just fully kills him as well. Cordelia posts on Facebook that Louise Wilson has killed her sister, and everyone is mostly saying, "Oh God, both of these sisters are kind of out of it. Like, this is pretty unlucky for the parents." Everyone thinks she's just having like a mental breakdown like Lavinia has had many in the past. And the book ends with Louise dyeing her hair and starting her life over. I thought this book was so incredibly fun. I think if I had read this when I was like 13, 14, 15, I would have been absolutely obsessed with it. It would have been my entire personality. And I think, a similar amount of fun reading it now as an adult. It's got such a specific aesthetic. It's so atmospheric. It's almost like Gatsby-esque in a lot of ways. I think Lavinia really wants to live this like 1920s lifestyle. I liked that it was this mix of trashiness and elegance at the same time. The writing was nothing special. I think that the book was having fun. I think the book was in on it, and I didn't think that it was like so overly corny that it was difficult to read. It was mostly told through dialogue that was pretty well written, and because I was so invested in these characters and there is so much characterization and so much singularity to each of them, it made me so invested in the story, and I didn't mind that the writing was like not that great. Like there were a lot of commas. There were way too many commas, and everything was so. Everything was so this and so that. There was a lot of the word so in this book. And it also very often does this thing where it goes, here's the thing. No, here's the thing. Here's the thing. And that kind of got a little bit tired by the end. I found this really hard to put down. I also finished this a few days ago and I'm still thinking about it a lot. I felt so immersed in the world of these characters. And like, I've never read a character like Lavinia, even though at the same time, she felt like an amalgamation of a whole bunch of other characters that I know exist, because she is so cultivated and she is so false. This was a book that it kind of surprised me how into it I was. I mean, there is so much plot. I would have liked some more complex character motivations, but I don't think that that was like something that felt like it was really like standing out how much it was lacking. In terms of the theme of obsession, this does call itself a classic tale of obsession. And I can see that, but I don't think it's that straightforward. A lot of these obsession books, I like it when it's like someone is just like completely like singularly obsessed with one thing. But this is less about someone with a really obsessive personality or a really like tight focus on something, and more about someone who is just genuinely trying to emulate someone else and take over someone else's life and be someone else. And that was just really interesting to me, more interesting than I was expecting it to be, though I don't know if it fits all that well into like books about obsession. I wouldn't call it necessarily a classic tale of obsession, though at the same time, like, it kind of is. It's just not the focus of the story. I would definitely recommend this. I thought that this was fun. I thought it was having fun doing the things that it was doing. It was really quick to read, even though it's so big. I hate when books are this fucking big, and I dread reading a book that I'm not talking about like width, like height. This book is too tall, and yet I couldn't put it down. So that really says something about the quality of the story. The next book I'm going to read here is Perfume by Patrick Süskind, and I'm incredibly excited, but I've only heard good things, so my hopes are high. I'll see you then. Hello, I'm here to talk to you about Perfume, the story of a murderer. This follows a man in the 1700s in Paris, and he has a heightened sense of smell and like no conscience, and it causes him to do some pretty crazy stuff in pursuit of the perfect scent. This book for me was 5 stars, so I'm telling you right now that I recommend this. And if you're interested in this like absolutely fucking crazy ride, gruesome, disgusting, horrible, amazing book, do not listen to the next part, because I'm going to talk about literally everything that happens in it, okay? Get the fuck out of here. So Perfume tells us the entirety of the life story of this man who the whole time it calls him by his last name, but his last name is a French word, and I am not saying a French word on the internet. I cannot handle the hate that I would get for my French pronunciation. So I'm going to call him the whole time by his first name, Jean-Baptiste. That's confusing if you've read the book, because he's literally never called that ever. I'm sorry. It's the word for frog. It's a lovely word. I think it's really satisfying to hear. I can't say it, I'm not going to try. Just to be clear, I will look up the pronunciation of authors' names, and I will try my very best to pronounce them correctly. I think it's so lazy when people are like, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this. It's just French specifically. I can't handle the perceived hate that I would get for how terribly I would pronounce things. My mouth just can't make French sounds. I'm Canadian, so like I have a history with the French language, and it's not a good one, and I don't want to get into it, and I can't believe you would ask me. Anyway, it's this guy's entire life story. It starts out with him being born in the 1700s in Paris, the stinkiest fucking city in the world, and his mom gives birth to him, and she would have just let him die. She kind of just throws him in the garbage, and she's like, yeah, I would have let him die. But he's discovered because he screams, and she ends up being sent to the gallows for this because she has actually let her last like 2 or 3 pregnancies also die. And so this baby is left alone in the world. So he's sent to a wet nurse. It's like part of some religious thing. And the wet nurse takes him to Father Terrier. And Father Terrier is like, no, you got to keep this guy. And she's like, from the start, she's like, this kid is a fucking creep. He's a newborn baby. She says, I do not like him. I don't like his vibes. I won't do this. He feeds way more than any of the other babies, and he also has no scent. And she's like, this is weird as fuck. What is that tweet that's like, have you ever considered but the kid has bad vibes? That's this kid. And so she sends him back to live with Father Terrier. She says, I'm not gonna be anywhere near this kid. I do not fuck with him. Father Terrier's like, he's just a little baby. He's so cute. And then he smells the baby and he's like, that's true, this baby really doesn't have a smell. And then the baby wakes up and starts sniffing voraciously, and Father Terrier instantly gets the creeps. He's like, oh no, I see what she was talking about. I need to get this child as far away from me as I can right now. He's literally the devil. So he sends him to like some boarding house that this woman runs. And he grows up there, and all of the children around him are incredibly disturbed by him. They don't like hate him or bully him necessarily. They're like deeply afraid of this creepy little kid. He's really behind developmentally. He understands language, but he doesn't really learn words unless they mean something to him. And they only mean something to him when they are associated with a smell that's important to him. This kid has like the craziest, most heightened olfactory. The workers in the olfactory are going off the fucking rails. They're working overtime in this kid's brain. He has this insatiable appetite for any and all smells, and his entire life, right from the get-go, is run by the desire, the need to seek out new smells and categorize them in his head. He can do this like very interesting thing where he has all of these smells locked away in his brain, and he can conjure them up at will and smell them, and he can like mix them together. Like he has such crazy control over the smells. One day he's watching some fireworks, mainly in the pursuit of new smells. He doesn't find anything super interesting with these fireworks. He just kind of like puts them away, categorizes them in his head. But he does catch this whiff on the air of the smell to define all other smells. Every other smell comes after this smell. And he follows it for half a mile until he finds this young woman, this probably like 13-year-old girl. She's just sitting there and she's peeling pears. And he's like, this is the smell of all time. And so he strangles her, not even really knowing that he strangled her. It's not really in his consciousness that he has committed this act of murder, because he is so driven by the need to smell all of her and get it all into his brain. He strips her, but he doesn't like assault her. He just smells her and smells her and smells her until he has completely memorized the scent of her. He thinks this smell is the smell that orders all other smells. This is the formula for creating a good, powerful scent. And he decides, I have to become a perfumer. Then we're introduced to Baldini, and he's one of the few perfumers in Paris, one of the most successful perfumers. Now, he's getting old. He's like very much a character, and I think in this portion where we're following him, there's like quite a sense of humor that is sort of unexpected at this point in the book that I found very enjoyable. We follow Baldini as he is trying to recreate a scent from one of his competitors, and he just can't get it right. He stays up all night trying to perfect this scent, and he just can't pull everything out of it. He also has a very heightened sense of smell. Nothing like Jean-Baptiste. Like, Jean-Baptiste is truly otherworldly with his smell. And he shows up on Baldini's door, and he smells this scent of the like competitor's perfume on him, and he says, I can recreate that for you. Baldini's like, no, you fucking can't. He's like, yes, I can. Give me like 5 minutes. I'll do it for you. He begs, he grovels. It's so theatrical. Like, he's such a little like 17th century weirdo. Everybody gets weird vibes from this kid. And he's like hissing all of his words, and he's like curling up in a little ball and like being all fucking weird. It's like so exactly what you would expect, but also like I don't know what I'm comparing it to in my head, but there's there's a precedent for characters like this, and he fits into it. His behavior fits into it in a way that's really fun. Baldini finally relents in letting him try to recreate this perfume, and he says this kid is probably sent by my competitor, or he's stolen the formula for this perfume. He can't actually pull it out, but he has shown that he knows all of the different scents that are in here, and Baldini knows most of them. He's been spending all night trying to figure out what scents are in this perfume. He's like, this kid's just a liar. He's just trying to trick me. But then he creates the perfume perfectly, of course, as we all know he's going to be able to do. But he does it with absolutely no skill in the art of perfuming. There's like a very specific order that things need to be done in, and he doesn't treat the alcohol as like a solvent. Like, he doesn't make the scent and then mix it into the alcohol to make it less potent. He treats it as another part of the smell, and he's like shaking it all around, and he's like just completely doing it in the wrong order, in the wrong way, and Baldini's like freaked the fuck out by this because he does it all completely wrong, and he recreates the scent perfectly. And then he says, this isn't even that good of a scent, and I know exactly how to make it a great scent. And so he adds a few things to it, and now it's like the most perfect scent of all time. Now Baldini, he's getting old, he's uninspired, he's losing his mastery of the perfumery, and he's also very like jealous and bitter over this younger competitor who's a lot better than him. And it's kind of funny in the way he's like, fuck, this guy's so good. God damn it, it's ridiculous how good he is. And he had actually decided when he couldn't recreate this perfume, he had this like epiphany where he was like, I'm just gonna sell the business. I'm done with this. I'm not doing this anymore. But now that he's seen Jean-Baptiste do what he can do, he's like, ooh, actually, I'm gonna hire you because I'm pretty sure you're a fucking prodigy and you're going to make me rich. Like, dirty, filthy rich. And he does. He becomes the most popular perfumer in all of Paris and all of Europe. And Jean-Baptiste is kind of just like hidden away in his home, whittling away at these little perfumes. He is never the face of anything. He's just like creating a whole bunch of new scents for Baldini, and they're perfect scents. They're incredible scents. And Jean-Baptiste is here, and he's fine with this. He's like not really getting paid. He's just kind of being housed and doing a lot of work for this man while he gets all of the money for it. But Jean-Baptiste is here because he wants to learn how to extract the essence of a scent, because he needs to have the scent of this young woman in his life forever. He becomes obsessed with the art of distillation until he realizes through a lot of trial and error that not every scent can be distilled. It's like a specific thing with oils. Like, you can't distill the scent of like a doorknob. It's not going to work like that. And when he fails to distill the scents of a whole bunch of different things, and he realizes that he's been throwing all this time into this and it's not going to work, he falls incredibly ill. And Baldini calls a doctor because he's like, this kid is literally all I have. Like, I need him to make my perfumes for me. The doctor says he's going to die within 48 hours. On his deathbed, Jean-Baptiste is like, sir, tell me there's another way to create the essence of a scent. And he's like, yeah, it's not just distillation, that's just what I do. But if you go to the south of France, there's lots of different ways to get the essence of a scent. And he becomes better, not instantly, but like within 24 hours, he's off his deathbed, he's fine. Like, his wounds suck back up into his skin. I love this thing in like the 1700s, the 1800s, where they didn't know jack shit about medicine, and they were like, everyone's always fainting. Like, if you ever read Crime and Punishment, these bitches always have a fever when they're stressed out. I love that shit. 3 years or so later, Jean-Baptiste asks to leave, and he needs Baldini's permission because Baldini needs to get him his like journeyman's papers. He's kind of like an undocumented person because he's grown up poor. It's a fucked social system. We all know that. Baldini says you can go, which is kind of surprising because Jean-Baptiste has made him the most famous perfumer basically in the fucking world and given him all of his money. But Baldini doesn't like this. Like, everybody knows this guy's a fucking creep. Everyone who encounters him is like, I don't like his vibes. He's so off. And Baldini has always been really unsettled by him. So he makes a deal. He has like 600 new perfume formulas. He says, don't go anywhere else and make these formulas that you've given me. And also don't come back to Paris because you would be major competition for me. And I know I couldn't out-perfume you. Jean-Baptiste's like, I could make literally an infinite amount of other perfume scents. I don't care. That's not even my goal. I don't care about making a whole bunch of perfumes and getting rich off of that. I just want the scent. And also, Paris fucking stinks, and I don't need to be here. I'm going to the south of France. I'm going to learn other methods of distilling scents. And now the night that he leaves for the south of France, Baldini's home and shop collapse into the river, and him and his wife both die. And this is a thing. Everyone who Jean-Baptiste leaves behind dies. Like, the woman who raised him, she dies in this like really fucking horrific way. She had been raising children mostly because her husband had died in like public hospital, I think of TB, and it was like this horrible public, like shameful death that he died. Like, he had no dignity. So she had been saving her money raising these children because she wanted to die with dignity. She wanted to have enough money to die privately. She ends up getting cancer that first, it says it first takes her appetite and then it takes her voice, so that she can't shout her protests when she's taken to like a public hospital to die. And after he leaves her place, he goes to work at a tannery for a little bit, and this guy ends up selling him to Baldini. And on the night that he sells him to Baldini, he gets drunk because he's made like the best deal ever, because Baldini has bought this kid for like a lot of money, a lot more than the leather guy thought he was worth, and he ends up getting drunk and falling into the river and dying. And I think this is fun. I think this is a fun, like, little juicy thing. Oh my god, Baldini's shop just collapsed into the river. What the fuck? Jean-Baptiste never hears about this because he's on the road. And on the road, he realizes that he actually hates the smell of other human beings. And the more distance he gets from human beings, and the less frequently he smells them, the more disgusted he is by this. And he starts to like isolate himself away from trails. He only travels at night. I mean, he can travel completely like pitch black. He doesn't need a light to guide him because he can smell a little rock on the ground. He's not going to trip over it because he knows exactly where the rock is, because his sense of smell is so fucking bonkers. So in the absence of human smells, they've become completely intolerable to him. Any little whiff of a human being is just like so overwhelming. He sleeps with his nose in the crook of his elbow so that he doesn't catch a single scent of any human being. And he decides, I have to get the fuck away from people. So he climbs a mountain. I think it's like a volcano. And he finds a cave in this mountain. And there are no living beings anywhere near this cave. And he lives inside this cave for 7 years, from the ages of like 18 to whatever that would be, 25. He lives in this cave. I'm really good at math. He lives in this cave and he just lies there in the dark, imagining his mind palace, his castle of scents and smells. And he just barely keeps himself alive. And he spends like truly like 22 hours a day just in this fantasy world, recalling all of these scents and mixing them together and just like smelling in his mind. And then one day he realizes that he himself doesn't have a scent. This is the first time he's noticed this. And he's like, I must have just gotten used to it. So he does all these things, like he takes off his tattered clothes and he leaves them for a while so that he won't be used to the scent anymore. But no matter what he does not have a scent that he can smell. He's a scentless person. And he's like, oh my God, this is so fucking freaky. I need to run. I can't even remember why. He's just like, I need to get the fuck out of here. I'm freaking the fuck out. I need to go back to humanity. Why don't I have a scent? Like, I'm not a person. I don't know who I am. Back with humanity in the south of France, he finds another perfumer who he begins to work for, doing a lot of hard labor, being paid very little, and he manages to create human scents. It's this very interesting thing where he'll create a perfume and then he'll also mix a whole bunch of like random little things together, like a little bit of old cheese and like a little bit of cat shit, and he'll mix this like the essence of human scent, and then he'll add the perfume on top of that, and the nastiness, the vileness of this human scent will get covered up by the perfume, but he puts it on himself and people treat him very differently. Instead of being incredibly creeped out by him, they now treat him with a neutrality that he wasn't afforded before. And he realizes how much he can alter and manipulate other people's perceptions through scent. So he manages to make perfumes that do specific things to people. There's a perfume that makes people pity him and give him money, and like they're not even registering that it's the scent that's doing it. It's just like causing them to have an emotion. There's a perfume that makes everybody stay the fuck away from him. There's the perfume that he usually uses that just like gives him this neutral odor. He can do whatever he wants to other people through the use of scent. He goes to this town and he gets another whiff on the air of another magical woman with a scent unlike anyone else, just like the first time. And he thinks, fuck, I have to learn the art of like cold pressing a scent so that I can get her scent and have it forever. I shouldn't have extinguished the woman before. I memorized her scent. That's not enough for me. I need to actually be able to physically smell it. So he says, I'm going to keep myself away from this woman because it's just going to hurt me if I sit here and smell her scent. Like, it literally brings him to his knees when he smells her. He gives himself 2 years and he thinks that is when her scent will be at its height. And that is when I will have learned the process to capture her scent. So he goes to work for a perfumer and he learns how to cold press a scent with oil. So he's learning the art of this cold oil pressing, and he is capturing the scents of things that he wasn't able to with the distillation, like a doorknob or like dirt or like a rock. And then he's like, I gotta move on to living things. But he realizes that when he wraps things up in these oil-soaked cloths, they emit scents that don't quite match up with what they're like genuine living scent would be, because they're in fear of death, and there is a specific smell of the fear of death, like the sweat that they emit, and it causes these scents to be like a little bit rancid or not to be exactly what he wants. So he realizes that he has to kill something before it knows it's being killed, so that it doesn't let off these like fear signals that have a specific smell. And then he has to cold press it for a specific amount of time so that it doesn't start rotting. That's the only way he can get the scent. He does it to a puppy, and then he's like, okay, I can start doing this to other people. And then it zooms out away from just his like little tiny perspective, and it's like the whole town. And we know that he has killed 24 women and caused mass panic and paranoia in this town, because all of these, they're like quite young women. All of these beautiful young women are being murdered and nobody knows why. And like, they realize that the women are not being assaulted, and that causes more fear, because they were thinking, the whole town was thinking like, at least we know the reason. And then that's not what's happening. And it's like, well, what the fuck is happening? They are all killed and their hair is shorn off and their clothes are taken off of their bodies, but they're not like touched. They're just like bonked on the back of the head and fallen dead. He's distilling all of their scents, practicing for when he can finally do it to like the final woman. And this woman is named Lore, and it zooms back in onto her dad's perspective. And her dad realizes these killings have stopped, but her dad realizes in a dream that she is probably the final person that is going to be killed by this man, because she is the most indescribably beautiful young maiden in the entire town. And he's like, there is no way that she's not the end of this. And so that night he's like, we're getting the fuck out of here. And he takes her to a different town, and he's like, I'm gonna marry her off, because I know that this guy is killing virgins, and if she gets married then she won't be a virgin. So I'm gonna get her fucked. And that's awesome, because I'm a good dad. It's weird, but it does make sense in the context of the story. But like, when I'm telling it to you and I'm like, oh, okay. It does. Okay. Well, actually, to be fair, in the story, he does often have thoughts of like, damn, this bitch is so fuckable. Like, oh, I wish she wasn't my daughter. I would so bang her. But then he's like, I can't think that. That's too weird to think. I'm just a father. He doesn't do anything, but the book is just definitely telling us like, she is unfathomably beautiful. She is beyond desire. Like, everyone wants her, even her dad. Her dad takes her away, and that was the night that Jean-Baptiste had planned to kill her and extract her scent. And he can smell that she's gone. And he goes to this guy, like the town warden or something, I don't know. And Jean-Baptiste is like, where did that carriage go? And the guy says, they went up this way to this town, which is where Laura's dad said they were going. But he was actually faking them out, and he took her to a different place. And Jean-Baptiste can smell that that's where they are. But his sense of smell is so strong, you cannot escape this man. So he follows them. And he puts on a scent for himself that is of not even just neutrality, but just like blending into the background. He just is not there to anyone. Like, he doesn't make an impression on anyone, because this scent is like so just like beyond neutrality. It's just nothing. It actually might be just his regular scent of no scent. He might not even put a perfume on. Whatever it is, he manipulates with his scent. He goes to the same inn that they're at, and he sleeps in the barn, and nobody even notices him. Like, nobody has any concept of who this guy is. And then that night, he sneaks into Laura's room, and he covers her with these linens covered in oil, and he extracts her scent out of her body. But he does end up being caught for this. Everyone is in a fucking panic, because the murders had stopped, and now they'd started again. And like this guy had been living among them this whole time because some copycat murders had started in a nearby town. So they were like, everything's fine. He's not in our town, so it doesn't matter. Now they know he hunted Laura down and has killed her. But he is caught because the guy who he said, hey, where'd that carriage go? He recognizes him. He's like, I know this motherfucker. This is the man. And then they tear up the little shed he's living in, and they find all the clothes and all the hair of all of these women that have died. And they also find 24 little vials of the perfumes that he's made out of them. So he's sentenced, and he is sentenced to a crazy death. Oh my god, France was so fucked up. He's sentenced to like being strung up and then in the town square and then hit 12 times, like on each joint, so that each joint explodes, but he's still alive, and then he just is supposed to just hang there until he dies. Everyone wants to come see this. Thousands and thousands of people flood the town square because they're like so excited for this guy to die. He's been terrorizing their lives. There's been so much fear and paranoia, and now they get to watch him get put to death. And it's like a day everybody takes off. Everyone in the fucking town is there. He gets taken in his little carriage to the town square, and he exits the carriage, and he has put these smells on him. And this smell, it manipulates the fuck out of everybody, because of course it does, because that's the power that this guy has. All of the people in the town square, first, they're like, this dude could not be a murderer. There's absolutely no way he's killed anyone. He's the picture of innocence. He's the picture of goodness. And also, I want to fuck. And it's an orgy. That's kind of how the book ends, with the entire town fucking each other. And because no one in the entire town can believe that he could possibly be a murderer, he is exonerated. And his employer ends up actually being sentenced because they kind of just like muddle around the evidence until it makes it seem like he was the guy who did it. Like, he owned the shed. That's why all the hair and stuff was in there, even though that's where Jean-Baptiste lived. Like, I mean, it's obvious that he did it, but no one can believe that because he's manipulated them with his little perfumes. He, however, is fucking miserable. He's like, I don't have a smell. I'm not a person. I don't know who I am because I can't smell myself. I learned so much through smells, and I can't learn anything about myself because I don't have my own smell. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to go back to Paris. And he goes back to Paris, and he's huddled around in this group. They don't even notice him because he doesn't have a smell on. And then he covers himself, like uses the entire vial of perfume that he's made from these women that he's killed, covers his entire body with it. And the people around him are like, oh, I need that. And they rip him to shreds and they cannibalize him. Like, in an act that he desired, like he wanted to be eaten by these people. It's this very interesting thing with like this full circle of Jean-Baptiste's life where he's murdered in this act of love, and he was born in an act of like neglect or like denial of love, like basically an act of almost murder. He's born, and then his mom's like, I hope you die. And so it all comes around. So first, what I have to say about this book is that it is, of course, so visceral. I've said before that I don't like food books because I don't like when we just start listing fucking descriptions of food, and we start listing these luxury foods. I think it's irritating. I've never seen it done well. And that I've learned it can be done well. Though this isn't food, it is about scents. This does that like sensation fiction so well. There's like a physicality to the descriptions of these smells. And I will say this book is very slow, and a lot of it is just describing smells and talking about smells and talking about what smells make other smells and how the science, there's a lot of science in here. It's like very scientific, but not in a boring way. I don't know how Süskind manages to do this, but he just does it. Even though it was slow, it was like slow in a deliberate way. Like, this book forces you to slow down when you're reading it, and I think that really makes the reading experience what it is. Because despite being slow, it's absolutely fucking captivating. The whole time I was reading this book, I was like, this is so smart, and it's so compelling, and it's so artful. Like, you read it and you're like, I am reading a piece of actual art, and you don't want to stop reading it. It's just an incredible book. It's just so fucking well done. Like, I only have compliments for this book, and I love that it has this like fucking crazy ending. The writing was just decadent. Every sentence was well crafted and important and meaningful. That's part of why you have to really slow down when you're reading it. Like, it took me days to read it, but I enjoyed it the whole time. Typically when a book makes me slow down, I'm like, okay, this is a slog, I want to get to the end of it. I could not get enough of this book. I would read this book if it was 900 pages. The writing is just that fucking good. Even though it's so over the top, the way this book treats the power of scent felt plausible. It made me think of perception and sensation in totally different terms. I feel like, I feel like I could be manipulated by a smell without recognizing that it was the smell that was manipulating me. Like, I was just thinking so much about, like, the subconscious perception of sensations. It was so insightful and also, like, so fucking crazy. Like, of course, this is so beyond anything, but it also made sense. I don't know how to describe it. I know that was not very articulate. It's just how I felt. I thought this character was so incredibly unique and so interesting to follow. This guy who's, like, totally and entirely driven by these innate desires. Like, he has no need for money. He has no need for anything. He doesn't even have need for, like, human connection. All he needs is smells. And that is, like, a crazy person to follow. And this book made me believe in him, even though who the fuck spends 7 years just in a cave dreaming? I felt like it made sense. I felt like, that's totally what he would do. I think if you're into, like, kind of sensational books that do have a fast pace, though this doesn't have a fast pace, because you're so driven to know what happens and know what this crazy ending is going to be, I feel like this is a really good introduction for someone who is looking to get into classics. It's set in the 1700s, but it was written in the 1980s. So you're kind of like dipping your toes into the classics water. I feel like there was a lot in common with classics that I have read. Honestly, mainly the font, but other things as well. It has a lot of, like, similar story beats, I think, and I think that this could get you used to reading classics that are a lot more boring than this was. I honestly, like, if this sounds even remotely interesting to you, I think it was really fucking good. Like it was crazy. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and I thought it was fucking absolutely bonkers. What the hell was this? I will be thinking about it forever. The last book I'm reading here is Perfect Days by Raphael Montes, and I am excited for this, though I already know that the literary quality is not going to be remotely near this. This is, like, kind of like a cheesy, corny little thriller, but I think it will be, like, wildly fast-paced, and I kind of need that after reading a slower book. So I will get back to you when I'm finished with it. I'll see you then. Hello there, I'm here to finish this video off with the last book, Perfect Days by Raphael Montes. I enjoyed this book. I found it really fast-paced. It was definitely the worst quality book that I read in this video, but it was still okay. This is about a man, and he kidnaps this woman that he has fallen instantly and obsessively in love with, and he takes her on this crazy road trip. It's a fucking journey. It's a ride. And it's quite intense. I'm going to tell you everything else that happens in it, so if you don't want to hear it, get out of here. Perfect Days opens with us meeting the main character, Tio. He is a 22-year-old medical student, and he's talking about his best friend, Gertrude. And we very quickly find out that Gertrude is the cadaver that they have been working on all semester. He's just named her that. Tio is weird. He's a creep. He seems like this very solitary, isolated kind of guy, and his best friend is a cadaver. So I think that tells you really all you need to know about him for the rest of the book. His semester ends soon after the book begins, and he moves his obsession onto this woman that he meets at a barbecue that his mom makes him go to, and her name is Clarice. Clarice chats him up a little bit. They have a small conversation, and at the end of it, she kisses him on the lips. Before he leaves, he says, I forgot my phone. Could I use yours so I can call a taxi? And he calls himself on her phone so that he can have her number. He doesn't really know what he's going to do with this information because he didn't just outright say, give me your number. He thinks about her for days. He's thinking about this woman, Clarice. And then he decides, I'm going to call her and pretend to be a statistics agency and get more information about her. So it's this really weird phone call. He calls her after church on a Sunday from a phone booth. And he says, oh, could you confirm your last name? Where do you go to school? what classes are you taking? When do your classes start? Asks her all these weird questions, and he gets enough information that he can go to the school she goes to, and he can follow her around the school. He catches sight of her, and he follows her all day and into the night in this like very tense, very quickly paced kind of chase scene. She doesn't know that he's there. He follows her and her friends to a bar. She gets plastered. She fights with her boyfriend, and she leaves, and she is like so incredibly drunk, she just lies down on the stoop of someone's house to fall asleep for the night. And he finally pulls over and he says, "What a coincidence, I'm here. Let me take you home." And he takes her back to her house, which he knows the address of and has already been to because he asked her for all this information as the statistics agency. And he gets inside and he meets her mom, and he's like, "Yeah, she's just really drunk. I'm just a friend. I was helping out." And she's like prone on the couch, and she says something like, "Mom, he's my boyfriend. Don't worry about it. I'll see you tomorrow, Tio." He, of course, freaks out. She's just called him her boyfriend and also indicated that they are going to continue their conversation. This is something the first conversation he was trying to do a lot. Like he would just try to leave these little threads hanging loose that would indicate that they are going to speak again. He would say things like, "You can tell me about it later." That kind of thing. She's now done this to him. So he shows up at her house the next day with a gift, a book of stories from Clarice Lispector, which she has said, "Don't tell me about it. Like, I've never read her works. She's all I ever hear about because we have the same name." He shows up and he gives her this gift, and she is packing for a trip. She's like, "I'm a screenwriter. I'm going out into the forest and I'm going to write my screenplay. I'm going to go on like a writing retreat to this hotel that my family and I stay at all the time." They're talking and he's like, "Hey, can I get your number?" And she goes, "You already have my number." And he's like, "No, I don't think I have your number." She's like, "Really? Because you called me pretending to be the statistics agency." And he's like, oh, she knows. Oh, actually, she's known this entire time. She's like, you think I think it was just a coincidence that you showed up seeing me drunk on the street? You brought me to my house? How did you know where I lived?" He's like, "You were really drunk. You told me where you lived. You just don't remember." She is not falling for it. She's totally onto him, and he's like scrambling. And then he goes into this, "You just got to give me a chance. I think we'll be perfect together. We'd be a great couple. You just got to give me a chance." She's rejecting him, and she's rejecting him pretty delicately, saying like, "You know what, Tio, I like you too, but I don't want to do this weird creepiness. Like, I want us to meet each other naturally." But he's so persistent and he won't stop. And then finally she blows up and she goes, "Oh my God, take the hint. The answer is no. Leave me the fuck alone. I'm trying not to be a bitch, but like, you just won't take the hint. Get out of here." And he takes this huge book that he's brought for her and he beats her over the head with it. And then he stuffs her into her own suitcase and puts it in her car. He takes her back to his place where he lives with his mom, and he kind of just hides her in his bed, and then he goes back to his school and he manages to steal some sedatives. So he injects her with these sedatives and he stores her under his bed for a day or so. While she's under his bed, he's editing photos of them together and putting them into a little like scrapbook that he's made for the two of them. He prints them off. He puts one in his wallet. It's so fucking creepy, but it's also very typical, like kind of exactly what you'd expect from a story like this. I found this to be a really formulaic book. I'll get into it. The family dog has been barking at the door the whole time because he knows that there's a woman in there, and so Tio has been giving him his mom's sleeping medication. He accidentally gives the dog too much, fucking kills it. The dog dies. The mom is panicking. This dog was like her best friend. It's quite upsetting how little he cares, and also how much she starts to catch on to the fact that it was probably him that did this. So she's like, "We need to get an autopsy on this dog." They take the dog to the vet for the autopsy. They won't get the results for 20 days. Tio's like, "I'm going to get out of here." He tells his mom, "My new girlfriend has invited me to go on a writing retreat with her. There's no cell service. You probably won't hear from us much." He is like managing to fall under this alibi of she's going on a writing retreat. So no one's really worried about her because she was like getting ready to go when he came and attacked her. He goes to a sex shop before he leaves and he buys 2 gags and some handcuffs to restrain her. He puts her back in her massive suitcase and takes her into his car, and then they drive up to this hotel where she's supposed to do her writing retreat. And he calls her mom and he calls his mom. He says, "We've arrived, just letting you know." He has met her mom and she has told her mom that he's her boyfriend, so it doesn't play as suspicious for either of them. He's like, "We've arrived, you probably won't hear much from us." He gets her into there. It's like a chalet, it's not a hotel, so they're quite separate from everybody else. He gets her in here and they just like live this life where he has restrained her on the bed, and she is working on her screenplay. And actually we get a chapter that is just her screenplay. It isn't a screenplay though, it's more like an outline of a screenplay, and I thought it was fun. I'll show you. There's like notes in the margins of this screenplay chapter, and there's like little scribbles and stuff, and I always think something like that is fun. I like it when we do new-ish stuff. Like, I don't know if you can see it, but there's like stuff written in the margins in like a little curly font. I thought it was fun. I think this screenplay was really terrible. I don't know if it was supposed to be terrible. It ends with like, it was all a dream. What I thought was that the notes in the margins are kind of just there to be there. It didn't make sense. Like, it's just an outline. There's no dialogue whatsoever. And there would be a note that would say like, pad this part out with more dialogue. Well, you don't have any dialogue written. This isn't a screenplay. The notes were as if it was already a screenplay when it was really just an outline. And I got a little bit tired of it. They stay at this hotel together for a while, like a couple of months. She's told people she's going to be gone for like 3 months. She won't even be back home for Christmas. They're staying here, and he ends up proposing to her. He goes and gets engagement rings, and he proposes to her. And she says yes. And she's like, really playing it as if she has fallen in love with him. She's washing her face that night, and she says, oh my god, Tio, my ring has dropped down the sink. And when he goes to look for it, she runs to the front door and grabs his gun on the way, this gun that he's been threatening her with. This is the reason why she has been kind of submissive, because that's not her character. She is very much like an outgoing, extroverted, irreverent kind of person, but with him, her personality is definitely still there, thank God, but she's not able to fight back in the way that she typically would because of the threat of this gun. She points it at him and she tries to shoot him, and there's no bullets in it. He's like, you think I would hurt you? There's no ammunition in there. He has been hurting her occasionally this entire time. Like, he'll slap her if she says something out of line or something that he doesn't like or something that indicates that they are not in a relationship. One night, her boyfriend Breno comes to see her, and Tio opens the door and he says, you can't come in. She doesn't want to see you anymore. He has been texting Breno and saying, leave me alone, I don't want to see you, from Clarice's phone, and Breno has been begging her just to talk to him. He has driven hours, shown up at the door, and he pushes Tio aside and he comes inside, and Clarice is, I think, sedated on the bed, and she's tied up, handcuffed to the bed, and he sees this, and he turns to Tio, and Tio beats him to death, and then mutilates, dismembers his body, and dumps it in the pond near the chalet. A few days later, Clarice's mom calls, and she's quite upset. She says, Breno has disappeared. He came to see me. I told him where Clarice was. He said he was going up. Have you two seen him? And he's saying, no, we haven't seen him. I have no idea what you're talking about. Clarice doesn't want to see him. She says, I just really want to talk to her. And he says, she's really like needing to isolate herself while she writes this thing. You know how artists can be. She doesn't want to talk to anybody else. And I don't think I'm going to tell her about Breno's disappearance because I think it's just going to upset her. And I think she's like really at a point where she's almost finished her screenplay. That day, Clarice says, why don't we go to this place that the women in my screenplay are going to go? I feel like I should take the same trip that they're taking and it will help me with my writing, because she's hit a writer's block. They get in the car and they hit a fucking police stop, and she is sedated in the front seat of the car. He takes her handcuffs off and he shoves her hands like down between her legs so that they can't see the marks from her handcuffs, but he gets pulled over and they ask to see a whole bunch of stuff in his car, and they get him to open up this case that has locked inside it Breno's wallet and his glasses, like very distinct glasses. He opens it up and the police officer pulls out Breno's driver's license and reads his name out loud, and Tio's like, I'm done for. This guy knows that this dude has been reported missing. He's gonna fucking arrest me. And it turns out that they're really just looking for people who are bringing drugs across borders, and he's fine. He just smelled alcohol on Tio's breath, and he kind of insinuates, we can make this disappear pretty easily. So Tio pays him like $300 and it's all fine, and they get out of there. They end up making it to this very, very secluded cabin. I think it's on an island. No one else is there, so she doesn't have to be tied up or gagged, and they're kind of just living there on the beach for quite a while. One night she's like, let's go for a walk. This is so romantic, isn't it? She's really been playing into his hand, trying to convince him that he doesn't need to do anything bad to her because she wants to be in a relationship with him. On this walk, she's like kind of playing up how drunk she is. She's carrying the lantern, and she beats Tio over the head with it. And he wakes up, chained to the bed and gagged in the exact same way that he has done to her, and she tortures this man. All of her anger and her rage and her bitterness are able to come out now that she is in power, and she wants him to fucking suffer. She doesn't just kill him. She wants him to be in pain. And it's pretty fucking satisfying after reading this book of this horrible dude doing horrible things to this woman. She forces him to open the case that the police officers had opened, and the case has Breno's glasses in them. And she sees this and she realizes what has happened, that Tio has killed Breno. And Tio tries to tell her, we did it together. You just blocked it out of your memory, but we killed him together. We mutilated his body. We buried it together. And she is so distraught. She takes his gun that she knows is empty. She tries to shoot herself with it, and then she runs off into the ocean. And Tio sees her through the window go under and not come back up. He manages, this is corny as hell, but he manages to get the key. Oh my god, what? No way. He can get the key now? All of a sudden, the key's in his reach? He gets the key for the handcuffs. He gets himself out, and he goes to the water, and he's like, she's dead. He's devastated because he still is totally in love with this woman, thinks that they will be together forever, and then he finds her. She's very injured, but she's not dead. She has some pretty massive wounds from hitting up against rocks, and she's unconscious, but he's a medical student, so he can stitch her up. But what he also does is stick a knife into her spine and sever it so that she's paralyzed from the waist down. After a few feverish days, she wakes up and realizes that she's paralyzed, and she almost goes comatose. She's so upset by this. Of course. A few days later, the two of them leave. He sedates Clarice and he puts her into her suitcase because he had been boated across to this island and no one was with him when he came across. So he's not going to be able to come across with a woman, and she's paralyzed. It's not like they have a fucking wheelchair. So she's in the suitcase. He gets into their car and he starts driving to the next destination. And she wakes up from her sedation and she hugs him and grabs his body and makes him crash his car into a wall. He wakes up in the hospital. He's mildly injured, but he's okay. And Clarice is in the ICU. She is in a coma. She's very hurt. And he pretends that they were just on a wonderful vacation together. A detective comes and interviews him about Breno's disappearance, and this detective is definitely onto him, but he's able to write everything off really easily. Helena, who's Clarice's mother, knows that Tio has done something to Breno, but Helena hated Breno, and she says, honestly, I think it's better that he's dead, but I need to know what you and my daughter did so that I can cover for you. I just need to be aware of what's happened. And she does cover for him. She doesn't like Tio that much. She's a little bit suspicious about this guy, but she doesn't tell the detectives that Breno was at her place and told her that he was going to see them. And so the detectives don't really have anything on Tio and kind of just let the case drop. For a while here, I think a couple of weeks, there keeps being these things where it's like, it's almost over for him. He's almost caught. Everything almost is out in the open, and then it's not. And he's fine. At one point, he goes to kill Clarice. He's just so overwhelmed with everything, and he's like, she can't wake up and tell everyone. I'll be so fucked. But he ends up being like, I can't do it. He takes out her ventilator, and then he's like, no, I should probably let her live. And he turns up the oxygen levels to 100%, and then he's credited with saving her life because he turned up these oxygen levels when she was in respiratory failure, even though he was the reason she was in respiratory failure. It's just always so close to everything coming crashing down for him, and then he always gets away with it. And then one day, after a long time spent at this hospital, hanging out with her family, getting on their good side, Clarice wakes up and she sees him and she goes, I don't know who you are. She has lost the last 5 years of memory. She doesn't know anything that has happened. The book ends with the two of them together as a couple. She ends up with this fucking dude. And the very end of it, she is pregnant. And she's paralyzed. She's pregnant, and she says, if the baby's a girl, I think we should name it Gertrude. So the main thing that was good about this book is that it is so quickly paced. That was actually sometimes a flaw, but mostly that was what kept me reading. I don't think this was the best literary quality. I don't think it was the most beautiful prose that I had ever read, and I think it was really overdone. This book felt very formulaic to me. I think when you are reading a book like this, it's always just oh, he's going to get caught, and then he's not caught. He gets away with it. And you can see how much of the book is left. So when there's a part where he's almost caught, it's the tension is dissolved because there's 200 pages left in this book. He's not going to get caught. And then it's just going to be this thing of he's almost caught, and then he gets out of it, and he's almost caught, and he gets out of it until the very end when one of two things happen. He either gets caught or he doesn't. So it didn't feel as tense as I think it should have, knowing what the story is. I think I would have loved a new take on this concept of like obsessive stalker, and I just didn't get it. And maybe that is because I have recently read a couple of books with that same topic, but I just feel like his justifications were very much overdone, very much typical, exactly what you would expect in a character like this. I don't think that either of these characters had a lot of depth, and I feel like that was necessary for this book to really work for me. I also think that this book would have been improved if there was more time in the beginning with this stalking aspect. It's like 1 or 2 days before he takes her out of her house and leaves with her, and I kind of feel like the most tense part is when he's following her around. I feel like this book left itself nowhere to go by getting out of that stage so quickly. I definitely wanted more development of Tio specifically. I feel like him being a psychopath was used to write a very flat character, a very typical character, a character that you can kind of expect the way he makes sense of things, who he is, how he justifies his actions. It was just all very expected. This book never surprised me, and I feel like with a kind of thrillerish book, I need you to surprise me. Of course, I don't think the author condoned Tio's actions. I think it was a very clear indictment of the way this kid acts. But there is this author's note at the end where he says, "It's perfectly possible to hide a petite woman in a large suitcase with wheels. I have tried it and it works." And that made me feel like he's kind of an edgelord. And then I looked back on the book and I was like, yeah, I think this dude was just trying to be shocking for the shock factor of it. And I don't really think he ever had anything to say. Like, I don't think it's like some crazy opinion to be like, stalking and kidnapping is bad. This is a bad guy who did this. There was nothing new in this book. I also think that the threat of sexual violence really looms large over this book and is quite intense. And I think the author was aware of that. And I feel like he was teasing it a lot. Like in the beginning, when Tio goes to a sex shop to buy handcuffs, I feel like the author was really trying to push you to think a specific way about what he was buying at this shop. And I didn't love that. That does happen in this book. I didn't talk about it because I didn't want to, but that is part of this book for sure. It's not a huge part. It's just one scene, but it's pretty horrible. And though I know that that is the reality of a story like this, I think this story is so absurd, so ridiculous, so over the top that you didn't need to make it realistic in that way. So yeah, like I said, the main strength of this book is that it starts and it just goes. It escalates like crazy. It's very, very quick to read. It feels like a really short book. I thought it was also like a pretty good translation from Portuguese. I think in terms of thriller quality, it was fine. Like, I don't really have complaints if I think of it as a thriller. Characterization wise, I felt like there was a lack there that I can just see this being a better book. But I don't think that he had the skill to do it. But anyway, that's the video. Honestly, this was a pretty good collection of books. 3 of these books I think will stick with me for a long time, and that is pretty killer. Unfortunately, I have read most books about obsessive women that I can find, like dozens at this point. If you can think of any that like you think I probably haven't read, some underground books about obsessive women, I would like that, because 3 books about obsessive stalking men, I'm a bit oversaturated. I feel a little bit icky. Loner, that shit's still on my mind. I'm very uncomfortable with that book, and I know that was the point, and I think that the author did a good job, but like, this was a bit too much for me. I don't really have anything to say. I hate coming up with an outro. I feel like as a watcher of YouTube, I don't like to watch an outro very much. Like, I feel like, okay, I've seen the parts that I wanted to see. So I'm just going to get out of here. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. You should go read Perfume, because damn, this book was so fucking good.